Hello, everyone, dear friends. I am pleased to welcome you or moderate this press conference today as part of the Grands Jours. Certainly every other year, we hold this event, which takes place in Bourgogne, Burgundy. So I'm very happy to chair it, and I attempt to make sure that these 5 days of tastings are such that Burgundy and the wines of Burgundy can beam around the world. I will not dwell on this, just give you a few figures on the 2024 edition. Without giving you a scoop, well, we are heading towards a beautiful edition, even a record one. Since today, well, last week we had about 2,600 registered visitors, professional visitors. There's a public, you journalists, but there are also wine professionals, importers, distributors. So about 2,600 were registered with about 130 journalists, 27 different nationalities. And today, we have about 59% of foreigners and 41% are French. And today, 60 countries have been announced. We'll see the outcome. Usually, we hover around 50 different countries. In other words, there are about 10 nationalities that are new compared to the previous editions. Together, of course, with France, Italy, Belgium, and the US. Therefore, we also have the Germans, the Brits, and the Chinese. These are the most highly represented countries. We are fortunate as well because this edition sees Asian countries coming back because in 2022, the COVID was not over in Asia and they could not travel easily. As you know, in 2024, we are lucky to be able to be with them side by side during tastings. So we have about 1,000 exhibitors, 970 precisely exhibitors, whether they are wine growers or négociants, who will be in the 13 tastings in 10 different venues. By the way, you have received a road book where you can find the various destinations and venues. In addition, there are 10 by-night tastings. They are so-called off. They start at 5 p.m. at the end of the official program of our event here. So far, in this early week, we have seen sunny days, even though tomorrow they're announcing rain. But we have sun in our tastings, so this bodes well for these tastings. A few figures now. I'll just give you the overall trend. We haven't made any comparison versus 2022, since 2022 was a bit special. Anyway, between the turnout of 2018 and 2024 in the first events that we've just experienced, between Monday, Tuesday, and today, we have nearly 40% of increased turnout between 2018 and 2024, comparing these two years. So my conclusion, therefore, is that today Bourgogne or Burgundy is attractive, and you have decided to come definitely to taste the latest vintage, but also discover perhaps a new appellation and new wine growers or négociants or sellers. Among the new things, you all have received a name tag or a badge for this event, and that badge you can use it for 1 year to visit Well, to visit the various places in Beaune. We'll come back to this with François, who will give you a larger presentation about this. You can find also among the various novelties some postcards which can be found on a display at the exit, and each day there's a different postcard. So you have a possibility of collecting 5 postcards with Burgundy images, which of course are related each day with the event that it takes place. Today we have a Mâconnais landscape, for example, for today. If you want to enjoy it and keep a few Burgundy pictures, take advantage. So certainly this edition promises a great deal, and we will give you the final figures at the end of the week. And anyway, it bodes well. I think this momentum should be with us until the end of the week. So without any further ado, I will now turn it over to François, who will deal with the upstream presentation regarding the market. Thank you, Raphael. Thank you for attending. You are our ambassadors, our in-betweens with this beautiful event, which started and is continuing with great quality wines and with beautiful sky. The temperature is mild. Nature maybe is moving a bit too fast, and the cold that has been announced might create some damage. Let's talk now about the 2023 vintage. With that 2023 vintage of great quality as well, and always, our region has beaten every record. We produced officially 1,899,000 hectoliters of wine. Let's round it up to 1,900,000 hectoliters, which is about 140 million equivalent bottles, with something that we're not very often aware. Well, Burgundy is whiter than redder. About there are 4 million whites and 39 reds. So when you look at Mâcon and Chablis, which are the Auxerrois and the Mâconnais, which are mainly white wines based, we can understand such volumes. The upstream market, that is the purchasing of those who put things into the market, is less dense or firm than last year. There's rose is about 12%. This depends on the volume harvested. As a reminder, we produced 200,000 hectoliters more in 2023 than in 2022. So the first 6 months of the purchasing campaign for the 2023 vintage are volumes bearing upon the purchase of grapes and must. And it is noteworthy that one appellation stands out especially, and that is Grands de Bourgogne. As you know, it is our baby, the latest born one among the appellations, and today the planetary success of the Crémant is up and running. This year, the harvest is up by about 30%, so we'll have enough stocks to satisfy a market which is very bullish. So one tastes the 2023 vintage, which we're lucky because that vintage is great, in step with those that came in before, such as 2020, 2019, And this proves once again that nature is well made, because following a year of disasters, nature boosted the plants, and the vines were able to flourish, and in 2023 as well. This is very important for us because our markets definitely needed volumes. So in 2022, remember we had harvested 130 million bottles. That's 10 million. 10 million bottles, potentially less than in the previous year, so they are coming in gradually. Those who put them into the market, whether producers or négociants, are finishing off to sell the 2021, even though I believe, since I saw this in Chablis, a number of early putting into bottles of 2023 exist already. So to me, 2022, I keep saying it, is a bomb. It's a fantastic white and red vintage. It's quite noteworthy. The wines there are elegant, and the Pinot Noir, let's never forget that what is typical is elegance and finesse. 2022, we produced elegant wines with a lot of finesse, which doesn't mean weakness, but a range of aromas quite extraordinary, which differentiates us from many other grapes. It is the Pinot Noir is very attractive, and everyone likes it. With regard to the Chardonnay, no one forgets that it is a Bourguignon one, and Chardonnay is a village en Mâconnais. The Mâconnais, it's Burgundy, and there again the wines are extremely pure, perfectly pure, very ripe, charming. And in the Mâconnais, and Sylvain, our CEO, took me away from a Mâconnais stand. I couldn't leave that stand because the wines that I tasted there were so tasty that it was tough leaving it. But I'll go back to it just in a little while. Laurent will speak about the economics, and then I'll come back and talk about our baby over 3 cycles, that is the Cité des Climats et des Vins. Don't hesitate. Don't be afraid. At the end of the presentations, we'll answer all your questions. Thank you, François. Thank you, Raphael. Ladies and gentlemen, hello. I'm very happy to spend some time with you and speak about the markets, the economic situation with greater details. You will see in your dossier that we entitled this press conference, Burgundy has all it takes. It might sound paradoxical, but I really believe it. The conditions are favorable, even though right now we are going, and we went through a more challenging period. However, we have all it takes for all kinds of reasons that were partly already explained by François. Our wines are sailing with the winds behind them. They are attractive. And lastly, that's one reason behind the success of the Grands Jours, with a number of exhibitors and visitors. After virtually a decade where chronically we were in deficit, lacking wine constantly, at long last we have stocks that would enable us to face demand with the 2022 and 23 vintages. You have noticed the weather is great. We have our springtime, and we are happy to be all of us together, and we can feel joy in the air. And spring is about the promise of future. We can say the same thing about the period that comes for Burgundy, even though we are aware of the fact that we need to be very careful and especially look closely at the prices of our wines. This is related to a series of reasons. especially there's a chronic deficit of wines in the last few years. All these things are being back in order. So I'm reasonably upbeat and even more reasonably for the coming times to come. So beside this, in Burgundy, we experience, and this is valid for everywhere, for difficult times. There have been many changes, and actually we have entered a period where there's a lack of evenness, with a changing weather. There are hiccups for all kinds of reasons. There are macroeconomic reasons. On the one hand, we've experienced the COVID. We've been also through the overstocks due to lack of consumption at the time. Then consumption became wild, and so that the distributors and importers wanted to replenish their stocks all over the world. Along the same lines, consumption is changing. The young generation consumes differently from their parents. Consumers are changing as well, and our production conditions are changing a lot as well. If we look at the last 10 years, we have a variety of production which is significant. We've moved from 2021 with the lowest volume vintage since 1984, so for the past 37 years, to 2023, which is the absolute record for production. We increasingly have hiccups or accidents due to weather conditions, so that negociants and producers change their way of working, they change their vision, and I will give you further details on this in terms of reaction to this, the climate hiccups, and even the way people manage things differently. We must now anticipate the lower harvest. When you have large harvests, you need to store it in order to compensate the lower harvest that will come, and that we saw in the last few years. This changes dramatically the way we think about things, including in terms of management of things, and financially speaking as well. We need to finance these stocks. We finance these so-called advances. The negociants finance their stocks. They need stocks to be able to work, and all of this in a context where interest rates have considerably climbed. They moved from 1%, 1.5% to 4.5%, even 5%, which plays on the profitability of the estates and involves everyone. We have already spoken about volumes of 2021-23. Now, this 2023 vintage that we'll discover, perhaps not this year, but shortly, is a beautiful vintage as well. It comes, we have great volumes. Now, can you break it down? Between the whites and the reds, no major changes compared to what you have usually. It's 59% of the 2023 comes in whites, 27% in reds. However, a slight increase of the Crémant. We are at 13% of Crémant for the 2023 production, which shows the momentum of that category. But as I said before, the Crémant, their preparation required time, the aging and so far. So when you have a beautiful harvest and when you produce Crémant, you have to store to face this production cycle, as well as those years that will be coming, which will be lower, weaker in the future, because we've experienced this for the past decade. Now, the estate sales, this includes what the wine growers put onto the market. They commercialize their products in two ways. Part of it, bulk wine or must and grapes sold during harvest and sold to the negociant, and partly sold in the form of bottles by every estate that you can meet during these tastings. These estate sales are up with the 2023 vintage. We are at plus 8%. as regards the bulk ones. The bulks are at plus 8% compared to 2022, and those bulk that include the grapes and must represent 67% of the total sales. The difference with the 32% is what is sold in bottles by the wine growers. So this rate is very high. It is rather, the estate sales, must and grapes sold by the wine growers or négoce are increasing by 14.9% and represent, since the beginning of the campaign, 71% of the wines that are marketed. 71% between the wine growers and the négociants were in the form of grapes and must, which is the absolute record, and shows, first of all, that there was also some availability, so they were ready to sell more and must and grains so that the négoces were able to replenish their stocks. It shows also that the négoce bourguignon wishes to buy increasingly musts and grapes. There was a problem with the mic of the speaker. So now what is sold by the wine growers in bottles is slightly down since the beginning of the campaign at minus 3.4%, but it is in step with the overall trend of the sales of Bourgogne, whether in France or export-wise, they are down. I will come to this in a second. So they are also in line with the overall trend. With respect now to the French market, first of all, consumption is evolving in France. It's changing. It is down overall. It affects mainly the figures of sales of large retailers, which remains the first wine distributors in France. We still notice a ramp-up of some areas, the more traditional areas, which is rather a good piece of news. We're subject to changes of the consumption trends with increasingly young consumers who consume differently from their parents in a more occasional way, maybe better quality wine, which is fine with us, by the way, in Burgundy. All of this comes in a context of destructuring of the way people eat. The red wines, in particular nationally, not only in France, are the most impacted by this lower consumption in France, and the reds are wines that are consumed during meals. The whites and the crémant, the rosé, are consumed as apéritif, and the reds more during meals, which accounts, I believe, for one of the reasons for the drop in consumption. So, given this context, Burgundy had resisted quite well because that trend has been in place for several years, and it's only since 2022 that we notice it in Burgundy. Up until 2021 included, Burgundy had continued to rise, especially with large retailers, mass merchandisers, because they were the most expensive. They're still the most extensive when it comes to large retailers, and until 2021 there was a rise. So there was enthusiasm, and in 2022, conversely, we see a drop that is quite sizable, minus 24% in volume, minus 14% in revenues. And to me, this is directly related to a lack of volume. We produce 33% of less volume with the 2021 vintage, which came during 2022 in the market, especially for large retailers. So it's not surprising that in 2022 we saw a significant drop. However, the good news is that that drop slowed down quite significantly. We're still down in 2023, but with figures much weaker. We are minus 9% in volume and only minus 2% in revenue, so there's some stabilization already. The Crémant de Bourgogne resisted rather better. Its sales dropped in 2023 compared to 2022 by only 1.7%, whilst revenues continue to rise. So also the Crémant de Bourgogne has been ramping up. We increased by 6.4%. With regard to the export market, the situation is quite comparable, and to a large extent for the same reasons. Well, first of all, French exports, without going the details, are down in 2023 compared to the previous years, both growth for all these macroeconomic reasons that we have underlined. I will go into the various countries in a second. Also, there's a lower consumption in certain markets, especially there's a lack of the 2021 vintage that was not coming in big volumes. With regard to Burgundy now, for 2023, we are at -6% in volume. However, revenues remain quite stable. But what is interesting to note also, and you will see it in your dossier, we had a very sharp rise in the last 10 years. Even though we dropped by 6% in 2023 compared to 2022, we are virtually at an equivalent level at the average of the last 10 years. So in a way, it's more the peak that we had known before that was exception. Now we are back to the average of the last decade. So no panic on board in the markets. There's no reason to be alarmed on this topic. With respect to our main markets, the top 5 markets are not changing very much. There's a slight change, though. We used to have in the top 5 once Belgium, and Belgium, rather not Belgium, we were used to having Canada in the top 5, and Switzerland now is in front in value in front of China and Canada. Belgium has dropped a little bit, and Switzerland is in front of Canada and China, which can be accounted for by a drop in China and in Canada, and we will speak about this in a few minutes. Export sales, well, there are 3 main regions. First of all, there's Europe that represents about 1/3. There's a North American area that represents also about 1/3, and this Asia. Asia represents only 13%, 1/3, with a significant rise over many years, and above all, 13% of the volume, but 22% of the value, which shows that we are selling products highly valued in Asia, and we are continuing to believe in these Asian markets. Now, the UK, well, I mentioned that last year, is a divine surprise. We were all very worried with the Brexit, with the economic situation there, the inflation, the purchasing power in the UK, following their exit from the European Union, and for the same macroeconomic reasons that we have in Europe. Well, the UK is maintaining itself extremely well given the context, because we are only at -4.6% in volume, with all the conditions that I explained, very few availabilities, and plus 0.7% in value. So it's quite stable in the UK. Focusing on Belgium, I've plus 2% in volume and 5.9% in value. Sweden, we declined in Sweden in 2023, whilst we had made great progress there in the last few years, which was due a lot to Chablis. Having said this, Burgundy confirms, despite a 10% decline in volume and 8% decline in value, we confirm our position there as the first vineyard in the Swedish market. So there's a special liking of sweets for Burgundy. Regarding North America now, the United States, who remain our first market, are down in volume, virtually 0.3% in value, but minus 5.7% in volume. The U.S. market has many hiccups, ups and downs during the COVID period. As you know, there's a whole line, because you have importers who sell to wholesalers, who sell to retailers, who sell to consumers, and at every level, each and every one is attempted to react to the economic situation by speeding up their purchases when there are periods of fear about supplies. This is what happened during the COVID and also happened after the COVID, where we had logistical problems and the cost of supplies had increased a lot. We have difficulties finding containers, so all U.S. containers is stored a lot. Now they have entered in a period of emptying their stocks, which accounts partly for the lower figures we have there. And it's not in the figures that you see here, but in the last 2 months, since the beginning of 2024, they are rather positive. Exports are up and running in the U.S. Some people claim that it would be due to an anticipation of U.S. elections if ever Trump is back being president. We're afraid of taxes, and some importers might be storing more. I have some doubts about the explanation, but I'm just looking at the figures anyway. Now, Canada has dropped quite a lot, minus 14% in volume, and in value, the same. It's due to a large extent in the Quebec and the Ontario, where they have monopolies. They lost a number of listings, especially in Quebec, where they do not accept the price rises that exceed 5%. That's their policy. But with the 2021 vintage, we had to increase prices more significantly than that. So there are a number of products that have been moved out, hopefully temporarily from the market, because their price hikes exceeded what is authorized in the Quebec province in Canada. With respect to Asia, a few words. Japan is down in volume, but remains quite steady value-wise. It remains our third market. The consumers there are fond of Burgundy wine, and Hong Kong and China are also down with figures fairly equivalent, minus 11% in volume, minus 5% in value, due mainly to continental China. We all know the difficulties they are going there. And every wine exporting country has difficulties in China. We'll have to look at this very closely in the future. This is what I wanted to share with you with regard to the markets, France, and the exports. Let me say a few words about our carbon policy of the BIVB, the Burgundy Wine Board, that is. I'd like to start off with an example, as a matter of fact. We see the weather we have today, these temperatures, which are very mild. You have flowers in the trees. In 10 or 15 days, we'll have the first deburring a year that comes in quite early. And wine growers and producers, they experience this day in and day out. They are at the forefront to feel the effects of global warming in the way they work. And proof of that is that at our wine board, we have a technical excellence development that does research. Our technical team manages about 66 technical research development projects, which are projects that do not come from nowhere. These projects come from the ground, from the producers who tell us, look, we are noticing a number of issues. We would like you, the Burgundy Wine Board, look at the grafts that are not have a hard time with the drier or warmer weather, and also some clones or vegetables that increasingly come early, with harvests coming earlier and yields that are lower, more and more losses. We would like the BIVB also look closely at cultural, the way we cultivate the ground, because it's hotter. We need to develop perhaps maybe more grass and have more organic elements and have more water in the ground. So when you have a drought, they would like us to look, for example, at winemaking methods under drier and warmer conditions with low acidity, with higher sugar levels. It concerns also the breeding, the putting into bottles, the bottling aspects. So there are all kinds of things that come from the ground, and they asked our wine board to deal with these technical aspects. Out of the 66 technical projects, about 2/3 of them are linked to global warming, which shows to what extent that weather warming is real and felt in their daily life by these producers. When we work on all these projects, actually we work on the adjustment of the way we work to the reality of the changes in the climate. But we do not work on the causes, but we must have also an action on the causes. And what can we do about the root causes? For example, the cause is the increase of the gases. The difficulty when we talk about these gases, it's difficult to see individually. Each one feels at my level, I'm a small operator, so it's about the greenhouse effects. We know we have family estates, the average is 8 hectares, and each one feels, look, I'm alone, I'm small, I cannot do very much at my level, and this is why I recall the symbol, the parable of the small little, when there's a fire in a forest, all these small birds, they look for a little bit of water. They all do it, and if they do it early and they bring one droplet of water, they might be able to put out the fire. So that's maybe something what we do. We have about 3,600 small wine growers, and this is where our role is very important. It's about being collectively minded. So the Burgundy Wine Board decided in a proactive way last June to launch a plan to reduce the greenhouse effects, because we decided to bring down our emissions by 60% by 2035, to be carbon neutral in 2035, which is very ambitious. Remember, in France and in Europe, the government plan is 2050. In other words, we would be 15 years before what is set by the government. In order to achieve this, our goal is to diminish our greenhouse effects by 60%. We're emitting now 380,000 tons in Burgundy. Our aim is to bring this down to 180,000 tons for the remaining ones that we could not reduce, because at one point, if we want to keep some economic activity alive, it requires some greenhouse effect and carbon. So the rest, the remaining 40%, we will commit ourselves towards them and to compensate them. So we know the levers, the weight of the bottle, transportation, etc. The difficulty is both to lead all Burgundy producers into this, but also especially monitor this trajectory, and this is where it's difficult. Now, first of all, this greenhouse reduction strategy, we've been working on it for the past 5 years. We did this with all the operators. We had meetings together. We involved the largest number of producers, and everyone. Young wine growers also are extremely aware of these topics. We also worked with ADELF, the French body in France in charge of recycling packaging, and also with an organization which is called FoodPilot, with whom we have co-developed a tool where we can track and monitor, which is called WinePilot, and WinePilot will be available for the producers in Burgundy in early April. What is WinePilot? It's a tool, it's a hub, a platform, an internet one that will enable each and every one to make their own carbon assessment in their estate and pilot and define what are their trajectories to reduce their greenhouse gases and validate them. And after that, collectively, in the interprofession, we can track the overall trajectory and notice what are the levers that are the most widely used by the Burgundy operators, or conversely, those who are not used very much, so that we can provide solutions afterwards that are more significant in order to be able to work on all the levers. What I suggest now is that we watch a small video that explains very well where we stand and that particular tool. Piloting our carbon trajectory with the WinePilot tool and ADELF. If there's a business where we see the effects day in and day out of the climate warm effect, it's ours. Everywhere in France, temperature records are being established. January 2024 turned out the hottest ever recorded. For the first time in history, the planet had more than 1.5 degrees more. So dry weather, record rains. We definitely have climate change. Experts believe that in 100 years, Dijon will be similar to Toscana and Greece in terms of weather. To limit climate change, the only solution is to limit our greenhouse gases. Valérie Masson-Delmotte explained this during Vinisphere 2020. If you want to limit warming, we have to limit all the piling sharply, the emissions. And the good news, if we human beings can have emissions equal to zero net of CO2, in this case, we would virtually not have additional warming. So it's really in our hands. The Vin de Bourgogne has an ambitious goal with a trajectory of a decline of 60% of the greenhouse effects and compensating the residual one. As part of this, the Burgundy Wine Interprofession launched the Objectif Climat with the support of ADEL. We commit ourselves for a very long time. It's up to us to take decisions that will not only impact but mobilize our children, maybe our grandchildren, and probably more than that, the generations that follow. It's about time to act now. And here in Burgundy, as elsewhere, all the territories are getting mobilized. In partnership with ADELF and WinePilot, the BIVB makes available a digital platform so that each player of the Vin de Bourgogne can drive their own decarbonation strategy. Concretely, the tool enables the 3,800 estates, co-ops, and negociants to calculate their carbon footprint and follow the decarbonation actions put in place. The tool is simple and educational. Its access can be made directly through the extranet of the board wine. After having filled out the questionnaire, you will have a specific dashboard, specific to your country. Then you can position yourself compared to the other companies in your region. The platform assesses also the storage ability of carbon in your plot and what is next to your plot. Thanks to that tool, we can collectively pilot the strategy to reduce the minus and to reach the objective of minus 60% by 2035. The carbon is everyone's business. Join us on the extranet space of the BIVB, which is a Burgundy wine board. Thanks to all of you. I'll now yield to François again, who will speak to you about la Cité des Climats et des Vins de Bourgogne. Thank you, Laurent. Let me add, in addition to this, that for the estate sales that are a bit more difficult than in the past, we have used our customers to have low volumes for 3 running years, so it's difficult to open the faucet all of a sudden and have them take in higher volumes. Now, La Cité, in 3 venues. Lastly, last June, many of you attended. We opened officially these Chablis, Beaune, and Mâcon beautiful buildings. Basically, the idea was, and still is, that the average visitor who arrives in Burgundy does not know well that we have whites and reds. We want them at the end of the visit to know better what our region is all about. And it turned out to be very successful. So 1 Cité in 3 venues with 3 different architects, 2 people in charge of the staging process. We were comforted recently with respect to the choice of these people we chose through rewards and awards, actually, that were received either by the architects or by the buildings themselves. We received 3 prizes on the enhancement, preservation, and transmission of the wine heritage and the promotion of a terroir. and the prize of the NEF, which is the National Association of the Elected People of Wine, and also another one for the preservation of the wine business. For us, it's important to have this recognition, because what we wish to do, we want to do it well and beautiful, which is the case officially now. The ITER-VITIS Prize and the only itinerary, the cultural itinerary recognized by the country of Europe for its action of enhancement and the preservation of the European wine heritage. As regards the architects, Emmanuel Andréani received numerous prizes and awards for this beautiful building, which looks like a cork. Now, in terms of turnout, we started off with 0. Difficult to imagine what we could hope during the first year, especially starting in June. We missed, I would say, the early part of the tourist season, whether in Beaune, Chablis, or Mâcon. Also, we welcomed over 55,000 visitors in the 3 venues, mainly in Beaune. 83% of French people visited, and mainly individual visitors. What is to be noticed is the interest for groups who are more coming for seminars. Mâcon is busy until the end of the year in terms of seminars, and Beaune also hosts many seminars. I mean, seminars that have nothing to do with wine, by the way. The combination of the visit of the Cité with the staging, and in Beaune the possibility of tasting meals and wines together is spawning a lot of interest. It comes as a surprise, but at the same time, it has a lot of value in it. So this year, 2024, is the first year of a full exercise. I will not detail all the highlights and all the new events that the Cité teams created in order to rouse the interest of the public. Having said that, of course, we will be hosting with great pleasure the Olympic Flame, who will go through Beaune and Chablis, the European Heritage Days, the 50 years of l'École des Vins, the wine school in Beaune, who for quite a long time was a subsidiary of the Burgundy Wine Board, and now under the protection of La Cité. It was created so that visitors, the professional and non-professional ones, may receive some wine-related teaching. We have all kinds of exhibitions, one at the end of next month on the history of the wines. It will be very interesting because the oldest wine properties will make available their archives, and also the École des Vins, the wine school, will be organizing thematic tastings like wine and chocolate together. And in Easter, this will be in Easter, so very shortly. And a few improvements also are in the offing. For Beaune, it's planned to have orientation tables on the terrace that would allow to better locate the various villages and the vines. And this will be kicked off in the month of June in order to appeal to younger people, and this is very important, really. La Cité imagined escape game with the subject, we will have to save vineyards. And the Bar des Accords will offer thematic evenings to explore meals and wines together. Let's not forget that La Cité was designed and thought out as a starting point to understand better the wines we produce, and after that, to flood, percolate the vineyards. And as part of this, we've just published our new guide of Vignobles et Découvertes sellers. It's a national invitation to come and taste in various cellars and wineries of the winemakers and of the négociants, and discuss things with the people who will be present there. And today, in the 3 départements or boroughs, 252 caves, domaines or négociants open up their doors fully, because we're often blamed, we Bourguignons, of not being easy of access, but which is not really the case. When people know how to deal with us, then we open our doors. Don't tell a wine grower when they say they have nothing left in their cellar. There's always at least one bottle to share with visitors. So this guide is supplemented by another guide of the celebrations that will take place in the vineyards, about 100 of them. The last one was the Tape Chaudron, as we call it, in Châtillon-sur-Seine, to celebrate the Crémant de Bourgogne, produced in the north of Burgundy. And as you know, there is also our national Burgundy celebration, which is taking place on the last weekend of January, La Saint-Vincent Turnout. Thank you, Raphaël. Thank you, François. Thank you, Laurent. I think we'll have a Q&A session now. Let's start with people attending physically here. I have a first question for Laurent, coming from Vitisphère. What is the outlook for the market? Can Burgundy manage the fact that not enough wine without hurting itself? Excellent question. I think we'll know more at the end of the week, because the Grands Jours de Bourgogne are a test of this. Because as a matter of fact, we are presenting the 2022 wines, the 2023 will follow. I would say that the answer is already in the number of visitors, quite obviously, and we've seen this for those of us who participated in Expo in Paris or in Provine, which are the trade fairs that did extremely well for the Bourguignons, so which shows that there's still a strong appeal for the Burgundy wines, and we mentioned that before. Our wines correspond to the tastes and expectations of consumers. No issue with that. They have never been as good, so tasty. So it's rather good news to know that at long last, after many years of shortages and deficit, we'll have enough wine this time to supply the markets. And I think this is the reason why we have so many visitors, because the visitors we have at the Grands Jours de Bourgogne are professionals, importers, distributors, or wineries. They're here to prepare their shopping list. When we used to say that Burgundy had all it takes to face the situation, well, there's the issue with prices that has to be tackled. We have a range which is quite broad, 84 appellations, with lots of segmentation from the Régional to the Grand Cru. Some wines seem out of reach, like the Grand Cru, the Premier Cru, the Grand Cru, that's 1% of the Burgundy production. For all the remainder, our offer represents, I believe, a good value for money, and I'm convinced really that this good value for money will again be better in the coming times. And the key is there, it's a soft transition towards prices slightly more reasonable that will help everyone to be happy. And also the good news, we have very good quality vintages. Thank you, Laurent. Any questions from the room? Please wait for the roving mic. In the meantime, let me add another piece of information. Burgundy will be receiving at the end of the year in October, in the third week of October, the global OIV Congress. Only it celebrates the 100 years of the National Office of the Wine. This convention will take place in France and in Dijon, a town that will having the international body, the head office will be there. The BIVB will also be dealing with what we call the technical visits. There will be technical visits on the ground. There will be 15 to 18 technical visits that will be offered to the Congress participants that we will be co-organizing with all the stakeholders of culture, economy, and of the wine technicality, including people from the Jura region. We'll be organizing these visits that will be focusing on one topic with a venue that, in order to welcome, to host these Congress participants. We are very happy. We are excited about this welcome that will put the spotlight on Burgundy again. Your question, sir.
Thank you very much. From Lithuania. I have a question about statistics you presented about markets, how they are developing and changing. So about methodology, I'm from a very small country, Lithuania. We are 25th in the list, which a bit surprises. So is just a question, how do you get data? Is re-export from some markets to other markets is somehow recalculated in this data? And I don't see Russia in the list. Does it mean that they are not in top 25, or it's politically just not mentioned?
The data come from the customs. So every exportation is registered with the customs, with the custom documents, and 2 months later we get a feedback from the customs, and that's official data from the customs. And as far as Russia is concerned, it's not in the top 25. It used to be less than 1% of the exports of Bourgogne.
Thank you.
Est-ce que tu peux faire la
Je peux faire la traduction en français.
The export figures are the customs-related figures. Every export is recorded with the customs because they are official European customs, and we retrieve all these customs-related figures. 3 months later, we get all the figures, the statistics, so these figures are official. As regards now the Russian market, yes, it's not in the top 25 and represented before the crisis in Ukraine less than 1% of the Burgundy exports. Thank you. Any other questions from the auditorium? Yes, sir. Please wait for the mic.
Alexis Capellaro pour Bourgogne Magazine.
Alexis Capellaro. So you have to move from one to subject to another one. Now, the WinePilot project, the video we saw mentions that carbon is everyone's business. Are other French wine growers concerned by this initiative, or are you the only ones, the Burgundy people, like the interprofession involved, concerned by Canop, for instance? In the case of Canop, François might be able to say a few things. For the other French wine growers, we are not the first ones to launch into a decarbonation project. Bordeaux, in particular, it's based on the Burgundy experience that we decided to have this monitoring system, because Bordeaux didn't have the monitoring and told us how difficult for us it was difficult to pilot the trajectory. Now, what is very interesting is this WinePilot developed with us, where the other French regions or interprofessions are using it, and there are good odds that it becomes the main interface for many interprofessions, many French regions to drive their decarbonation itinerary. What about Champagne? I couldn't. What about Canop? I had in mind in the interprofessions, because Burgundy. What about Canop? Can you say something about Canop? For the WinePilot, well, Canop is the association of Burgundy, Champagne, and the Beaujolais, and the Jura, the region, to a lesser extent, to produce. One of the main issues that we're encountering today in Burgundy or in the French vineyards is the aging. It's very difficult to pull out vines, especially when you have very small plots and small harvests, because you lose between 5 and 7 years of harvest when you pull out vine. And then also we notice that vines are less resilient to different diseases. Even vines are very resilient and adapt well to the new conditions, especially with regard to heat. There's also the dry weather is something we fear a lot. There are all kinds of diseases coming from insects, etc., etc. This leads us it leads us to, at the technical center, to be very watchful and be always a step ahead of the game. But there are a number of projects that we cannot carry out by ourselves because we don't always have the finances, and it's better, by the way, also to combine the technical know-hows between Champagne and Burgundy. And in Champagne, we have a technical center that has many, many expertises, as you know. Is it possible? So we have built something that is insect-free, and we will be benefiting over the long run, all of us, of the plants that will be produced. And by the way, Burgundy wine is made up of 50% of clones. This Canop project involves only the clone-related selection, but we want to develop also something for the so-called massal selection, as we call it here in France. Any other question? Thank you for your presentation. I have a question regarding your project of carbon neutrality. Is it only for production purposes, or is it also related to tourism? It also includes wine tourism, like in regard to tourism. You have the visitors who travel and come and visit. It's part of the 380 million tons that we emit each year. But 380,000 tons, that's 12 tons of CO2 emitted today by hectare, and the aim for reducing by 60% is to bring it from 12 tons down to 4 tons per year, which gives you an idea about the scope and the efforts that need to be made. It's highly committing for all the Bourguignon producers. As regards CO2, vines are CO2 well like the forest. There's no difference. In the compensation part, about the proportion that cannot be reduced. There are several ways of setting the CO2. It's first of all in the soil, the organic matter. It's the vines themselves. It's around the vines, the hedges, the trees, the fruit trees, and lastly, the woods and forests that above our wine villages. Inside our territories, we want to do this. We calculated we can do it at the scale of our territories without going elsewhere. And most of our wine growing villages, like Côte de Nuit, Côte de Beaune, well, there, above the hills, there are forests, and you can set there, trap there more CO2 from Canada. Sorry, I cannot speak. I have in relation to this, I heard during a conference when the soils are alive, CO2 trapping is higher. Can you ask your producers to resort to this? Sorry, she had a voice extinction. Sorry for my voice, says the questionnaire. I think I might have understood your question. Yeah, the organic content in the soil is very important. It's extremely important. It helps to trap carbon, but not only it helps to have a life in the soil that is more active, therefore have plants that are more efficient. They can capture more easily, therefore, the minerals, etc. But also, and this is not so well known, but it's very important, when you have organic matter, soils that are balanced organically can set 20 or 30% more water. So it's also an essential tool to resist dryness. So it's a virtuous circle that we encourage, whether you are into organic stuff or not. At any rate, we can all increase the life of the soils, the setting of organic matter in the soil, and increase their organic rate in soils, which in France, especially in Burgundy, but Burgundy is not the worst, are particularly low. Well, why it's so? Because we've exhausted our rate of organic matters because of the last 1,000 years. Well, they are much higher in other areas in the world to supplement. Thank you for your presentation. For the market, there's a program for your the new generation. People couldn't understand.
The new generation in Burgundy wines.
Nous avons fait une étude.
We made a very in-depth market study on the behavior of the new generations. This is a topic that we are very highly interested in. It's key for the future. We are working on it, not ourselves only, but the other French interprofessions as well. This wide-ranging study that has been carried out, especially by the Burgundy Wine Board, the BIVB. Coming back, I have a question here. We're asked to give examples to reduce the CO2. Not the SO2, the CO2. Look, we did identify the various levers. By the way, in the documents you will find this. There's a beautiful table on this. I know it's written in very small, they're different colors. The main levers are, first of all, the weight of packages, especially the weight of bottles. That's the main lever when it comes to the quantity, but also the one that is the easiest to carry out, because reducing the weight of the bottle, everyone can do it immediately. There's no reason to wait. There is in the market a full range of bottles. Use lighter bottles is something that we can do very quickly. So we need to encourage this, the wine growers and producers, to use lighter bottles, which is not always so easy. because at the same time, to give you an idea about the complexity of things, at the same time, we are studying the possibility of reusing bottles, that is, but for bottles for which you have to pay something cannot be done in the international market. You cannot bring back bottles from Canada in terms of carbon footprint, but you need to use heavier bottles because they need to be more resistant to resist transportation, washing, and so far. So all of this is extremely complex, and I'm used to saying there's no easy answer to complex questions, and the problem with the weather problems and the greenhouse effects, it's very complex. We've talked about the weight of packages, and transport is the second item that emits the highest level of greenhouse effect. We have to think about our transport, therefore. We will hear about sailing cargoes. However, optimizing transport and avoiding to send out lorries that are not full or containers that are not fully rate, and having optimized pilots, this enables to reduce sharply the carbon footprint. And then there's also between ourselves, when we go from one vineyard to another one, when you go to Beaune, for example, you travel to Beaune to a press conference, it goes through maybe going on bikes, on using vehicles that like electrical vehicles, for example. These are 3 levers, and there's a whole series of others. The levers have relatively weak, but we will really have to. Let me take an example. We're looking, for example, at an app, which is like a professional BlaBlaCar, which enables the employees of different estates in a village to coordinate themselves. Some may live in Dijon, others in Beaune, and work in Vougeot, for example. They might go together in the morning together, and it's the same thing in the evening. It will be a low impact on the impact of greenhouse effects, but all of this will contribute. So we have many solutions, therefore, and the role of the board is to be providing resources and propose these solutions and assess them, because we know that we will be offered suggestions that are far-fetched sometimes. So our role of the wine board is to say, yes, this could be okay for that, and we have valued it, appraised it, and we would encourage you. So we want to be very concrete. And our interface, the WinePilot, will be the main interface between the wine growers and the interprofessional, and help transmit this information, and each one to visualize, simulate their trajectory, and see where you land. And we will be having anonymously the feedback lever by lever, and we will be seeing if we need to encourage even more maybe lighter bottles, etc. In the interprofession, we have some power, 140 million bottles. When we talk to glass makers, we can talk with them. It represents a lot in the market. It's the role of the interprofession. Each one will have to tackle this individually, but there's a collective work that is essential, and it's our role at the interprofession to tackle it. Let me add that our region is microscopic on a global scale. 33 hectares of wines, it's nothing. But the players, we are the first concerned by these problems, and this is why we decided to tackle them completely. It's a sign which is interesting, and our wish is that other aspects of the economy also become interested in it. Obviously, when you are in a large metropolis, and if the transportation means is an underground or a metro or buses, you're less aware of it. But when during the third day or following a third night of intense frost. The people who work for you cry because the work of a full year has been destroyed. It is food for thought, definitely. You were talking about a small bird before. Even if it's a droplet in the fight against weather issues, we really have to tackle this. We have a question.
Thank you. I'm from China, and thank you for the presentation and the speech. There is a question, because you mentioned about China and Japan. They are still the third largest marketing, largest market for Burgundy, but it's like both dropped. But actually for China, the Burgundy still have the bigger potential, and even for the generation now and the young generation, Burgundy is still the most popular wine region in China. So any marketing campaign or any like motivative activities try to push the China market or even the Asian market in the future? Thank you.
We are quite aware that the Chinese market remains, but is also one of the future markets for the world of wine and Burgundy, even though we've seen some slowdown for the past 2 years, which related to the exit of the COVID and ways consumption modes that have changed a little bit. We know that there's a lot of appeal for Burgundy wines and the Burgundy style from young consumers. We must work in Burgundy with some allocation of means. We don't have budgets that are limitless, and the strategy that was decided 3 years ago was to highlight technical matters so that we can find all these answers to the weather deregulation, or so we reduce communication and marketing budgets, therefore. So our thought basically was as follows. If in 20 or 30, 50 years' time we are no longer in a position to produce wine, why communicate and do marketing? So let's start by making sure that we have a production potential. So most of the availability were focusing on technique and marketing. We're not forgetting the Chinese market, especially in China. We have a network of approved trainers who are our ambassadors and organize tastings there. So this remains very important. Let me wrap up because it's now 5:20. Oh, you have one more question. Rebecca from...
I'm curious if you're aware of any estates or domains they're using any AI technology in the vineyard as well as the wine cellar or the winery. Thank you.
It's a very interesting question because it seems now that
It's a very interesting question because yes, we get the impression that AI will be able to do everything. Well, artificial intelligence in our business line, we see it can be helpful when it comes to sales. All it takes is to write ChatGPT, produce a technical form for the Choré des Beaunes White 2021 of the estate Dubois, and you get something that is perfect. So it will facilitate things. But when it comes to production, it's different, definitely. We know when it comes to the size of the vine, which is an important gesture or move, AI helps to better understand today how we can prepare the vines for those employees who are starting to do that kind of job. Now, producing wine, it's like cooking. What is important is the ingredient, which is the grape in our case, and after that, it's the chef, the wine grower, the winemaker, who, through their experience, I don't think that artificial intelligence surpasses the experience, so the winemaker will produce this afterwards. Very good transition for my conclusion. Burgundy, La Bourgogne, to me, is the ultimate model of sustainable wine, because we've been for about 1800 years, we've been doing quality wine, and we're still present, which proves that we've struck a balance between our production, the natural context, the people, the men and women who do this work, and the question is to maintain such an equilibrium. It's more artisanal, more based on craftsmanship with the human factor, which we clamor, even though it could lead sometimes to a few defects. But remember that a collection stamp, what makes it rare is when you have a small defect in the way it's cut. This makes it very valuable. So I'm not hoping that one day that we make wine with AI, because it's important to keep this human aspect, even if there are some defects in the wine. But if it's typically human, it would be still great. We have this artisanal family kind of winemaking. Our challenge is to make this transition towards decarbonation after having adjusted throughout the years with the phyllox 150 years ago, wine growing more and more respectful for the environment, more and more organic. It's a responsibility of Burgundy in the future. I have great trust that we will succeed. Thank you very much, all of you.